Well, hello. Welcome back to the middle ground. This has been a really big start to the week in Georgia political news. As I have made known previously, this indictment, Georgia, is of particularly personal interest because I am a voter in Fulton County. These are my state elected officials who were threatened. I am represented by the district attorney who is prosecuting someone who tried to overthrow my personal vote in the 2020 presidential election. So, out of all of the indictments this summer in the past months, I have stated in previous videos that this one was the one that I was most interested in. So let's get to it. This is going to be a reaction video. I do have some footage queued up. We won't have to watch the entire videos, but I have got a couple of statements from yesterday that I wish to respond to. The first will be Fannie Willis, the Fulton County DA's final indictment statement late into the night. So I have skipped over the reading of her charges and the people charged. I will put a link below to Georgia websites where you can find that information to read yourself. I did want to highlight some of her answers to questions about the timing of the trial, as well as specifics of the charges.
I'm not going to discuss our investigation at this time.
Ma'am,
I'm going to take
the arguments made by former President Trump that this is a politically motivated indictment.
I make decisions in this office based on the facts and the law. I make decisions in this office based on the facts and the law. At this time.
Ma'am,
I'm going to take
the arguments made by former President Trump that this is a politically motivated indictment.
I make decisions in this office based on the facts and the law. The law is completely nonpartisan. That's how decisions are made in every case. To date, this office has indicted, since I've been sitting as a district attorney, over 12,000 cases. This is the 11th RICO indictment. We followed the same process. We look at the facts, we look at the law, and we bring charges.
Well, I'm sorry that my video has been so laggy. But to hear that, she's going to try to pursue this trial date within 6 months, but obviously has to juggle a lot of things regarding all of the other indictments in other states and which order these trials are going to go. I want to give some insight into Georgia politics regarding this district attorney, because Governor DeSantis has now removed an elected prosecutor in Florida, and Georgia legislation passed this summer to be able to remove prosecutors. And I cringe that the governors are removing elected officials, people who have been elected by the people of Georgia. This is not a direction that I am excited to see going in Georgia. I know that many members of the Republican Party, surrounded by all of these same conspiracy theories, I want to refer to a clip later where with Hillary Clinton's comments about our current state of affairs, and she has some really great comments about the shadow that Trump is casting right now in terms of some things that are acceptable and the way that some people are behaving with his presence around the Republican political system. This is not a direction that I think the Republican Party should be going. I certainly do not support DeSantis in his messages. However, I also want to get to the next clip, and I want to discuss the lawmakers or the elected officials in Georgia. Obviously, Brian Kemp is still our governor and was in 2020. Brian Raffensperger was our Secretary of State in 2020 and still is our Secretary of State. And Geoff Duncan has testified yesterday at this grand jury, and he was previously our lieutenant governor and is no longer our lieutenant governor now. But these are all members of the Georgia Republican leadership who are cooperating with this investigation, and I want to include Geoff Duncan's statements about this investigation next. Duncan was on CNN last night, but there was something quite astounding that he said while leaving the court caught on tape. And I do want to review and it was a very quick statement he made rushing to his appointment with CNN that I think is really indicative of some of the leadership attitudes potentially toward this investigation and toward the DA, Fani Willis.
As a Republican, this is a pivot point for us. This is a pivot point that we're either going to wake up to or we're not. And the pivot point is we need to get this party back in the right direction. And to do that, we're going to have to heal and hear some tough stuff.
Do you stand by the integrity of the election in Georgia in 2020?
Certainly do.
How long were you in there to testify?
Is it clear how many other witnesses there were left to go?
Does it appear clear charges are imminent?
Did you testify to the special counsel's investigation?
He has made some statements here that he feels the Republican Party at large, not only in Georgia, needs to hear some tough things, and that he himself told the truth. He was in a position to oversee a lot of the things that were happening during the election, and he was able to bear witness to those events personally and firsthand. And his stance is that this investigation is needed to get to the truth, that he knows what the truth is because he was there firsthand, but there are all of these rumors and false information being spread throughout the party, his own constituents, his own party members, that he doesn't agree with, but he does want them to finally see the truth.
Joining us now, you saw him in Nick's piece. He's someone who testified before that grand jury, just hours before the indictment was returned. CNN contributor and former Republican Lieutenant Governor of Georgia, Geoff Duncan. Geoff, I appreciate your time this morning. First off, the 98-page indictment, it's now out. You've seen it. Was there anything in there that either surprised you or looked off base from your personal experience throughout this process and this investigation?
Yeah, my early assessment is that there's really no names on there that surprise me, and there's no scenarios that surprise me, right? And that might come into contrast to Republicans all over the country, but this was what we were talking against during the immediate days and months after the 2020 election cycle. The math just didn't add up, right? You couldn't take a tweet and turn it into a factual scenario, and so no, nothing really surprised me that jumped off the page.
I want our viewers to hear something you said last night. I believe this is when you walked out of the courthouse about what you hope America takes from this. Here you were.
My hope is that Americans believe us. My hope is that Republicans believe us, that this election was fair and legal. And I certainly think this is a pivot point for us. As a Republican that cares about the future of this country, this is our moment to hit the reset button.
Your hope is not echoed by a vast majority of Republicans who still say in polling that they believe that Biden didn't legitimately win the election. And it's not something shared by most of the people running against Trump. But you think this one changes things?
Yeah, this certainly carries an even bigger weight than the other ones. I mean, as if a federal indictment doesn't carry weight or other states' indictments, but certainly this added to it. But you know what, Poppy, I'm going to be critical of my party. I'm going to be critical of those that are running for president in my party. I'm going to be critical of governors and senators. They know the right thing to do here. The right thing to do is to call Donald Trump out for lying, misleading us, and taking our Republican Party straight to the ditch. That's what's happened here. And until we all want to stand up and speak as loudly and clearly as we possibly can that the Republican Party needs to use this as a pivot point, to hit the reset button, to go to a GOP 2.0 that really gets us back to talking about the policies. If 2024 is about the issues, if it's just strictly about the issues and not about Donald Trump, we will beat the brakes off Joe Biden. He's got no positive record on the border, national security, public safety. These are issues that we can take him to the floor with. But if we just make it about Donald Trump, we're going to continue to be embarrassed. And our campaign speeches in the Republican Party are going to be from courthouse steps every single day. We can do better. We should do better. And this needs to be the wake-up call. And I've certainly been vocal about this. We need to have everybody running for president stand up together, not because their consultants tell them it makes sense today, not because it doesn't feel like a short-term sugar high, but get up there and tell Donald Trump to get out of this race for the good of the party and for the good of the country.
Geoff, I think to that point, and credit for consistency, you've said that after, I think this is now at least the third indictment that you've said very similar things about it's time to turn the page. It's time to get away from this. It's time to not always be defending or rallying around somebody who's been consistently indicted, and yet the former president's poll numbers continually seem to go up in moments like this. He's able to frame, particularly in a primary electorate, these as political attacks by Democrats. To that point, did you get any sense that Fani Willis and your interactions with her during this process or her team was politically motivated? I think the former president called her a rabid partisan, or that the grand jury itself was out to intentionally get the former president.
Look, that's Donald Trump's game. Every time he gets put in a corner, he fights like a kid, right? He calls names. There's no merits behind it. I certainly didn't encounter any of that. It was a very professional process, a very well-informed district attorney's office, a very well-informed jury that asked very intellectual questions throughout the process. But look, when leaders of your party are telling you that something's true, I guess it's just inherently natural to believe them. And so as long as our party leaders, as long as Kevin McCarthy and others and these candidates for president, I mean, you look at Ron DeSantis, he's literally fired almost everybody in his campaign. If he wants to really turn the tide on where this thing's headed, just tell Donald Trump that he's wrong, he lied, and he needs to get out of the race. Let's watch the deflection in the numbers at that point.
So because as long as this proceeds as a state case and doesn't move to be federal, which I don't think they're going to have success in trying to move it if they do, in Georgia, the governor can't pardon someone, right? So if Trump were convicted, the governor couldn't. It would have to go to a board of parole that has that power. Some conservatives in your state and outside the state are pushing for the law to be changed. It would give the governor, Brian Kemp, the ability to pardon. Do you think that would be successful at all? And should Kemp have that power? Could you even see him utilizing it in that way? I mean, he's someone who upheld the results in Georgia.
Look, I think our most important duty right now as Georgians is to let the judicial system play out as it sees fit, as the process is supposed to work, not to create all kinds of workarounds. I mean, look, that's really where we got with this whole mess to start with.
This is actually what I was going to say. I have heard crazy ideas that Georgia legislators need to pass a bill so Brian Kemp can pardon Trump. These people are so disconnected from reality, from what's going on in Georgia, from Brian Kemp's relationship with Donald Trump. As I started this segment here, that these people in leadership in the Republican Party in Georgia are the people who were attacked by Trump. They are all cooperating with the Fulton County DA. You can hear him praising and showing respect and admiration for the way the Fulton County DA is conducting this investigation. This investigation are facts that he thinks people need to know to move on. And the idea that Brian Kemp or any of these Georgia Republican leaders are going to pardon Trump, even if it were legal for them to do so, is banana pants. It's not reality. Trump tried to get rid of Brian Kemp. They are not friends. Trump tried to get him not reelected in last year. Trump was trying to beat him in the primary with a really crazy opponent, but we won't get into that. Trump has called Brian Kemp names, insults, and Brian Kemp is not Lindsey Graham. Brian Kemp doesn't tolerate it. I don't know why Lindsey Graham does. That's a whole can of worms right there. But Georgia politicians are not friendly to Donald Trump. The idea that anyone thinks that Georgia's political climate would be a climate where anyone would be in a mood to pardon Donald Trump if convicted is laughable. I don't know what planet you live on, but it's not the same planet that my state of Georgia is on. One thing I noticed Geoff Duncan saying in some of these clips was that he feels that Georgia Republican leadership at large should do the right thing. This is an opportunity to step up and do the right thing. And on that note, I do want to include the appearance by Hillary Clinton on Rachel Maddow last night. Wonderful timing, isn't it, that they were able to get her on the show on this incredibly significant day. I also brings to light my attitude toward this entire situation. Many of you know I have never been particularly a fan of Hillary Clinton prior to working on her campaign in 2016 with my Yale classmate Jake Sullivan. And she makes a comment in this video that's kind of a funny echo back to that first conversation I had with Jake, so I had to laugh about that slightly. But I had never voted Democrat in my life. I didn't vote for her husband. I did not vote for Obama, ever. And the reason that I was working on her campaign in 2016, because my attitude is that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And I was trying to prevent us from going down this road in the first place. Right now, we're looking for pounds and pounds and pounds of cure to the problem that has happened from Donald Trump being president and having all of this power. And that was the road I was trying to avoid. And so, on that note, Mrs. Clinton herself.
When we were watching Gwen Keys-Fleming and Lawrence speaking just a moment ago about the mandatory minimum prison sentence in Georgia for a RICO conviction, Ms. Keys-Fleming noted, maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit, and I saw you chuckle. Clearly, we are getting ahead of ourselves, and we are thinking about potential sanctions as a result of any of these trials. Let alone, there's these things getting to trial, there's the question of conviction, there's the question of sentencing, but then there is, at the end of that road, the prospect of the prohibitive favorite for the Republican presidential nomination being in prison. Do we as a country have an interest in him not going to prison so that we can still call ourselves a country where leading politicians don't get locked up?
Look, I think that's going to be a much debated issue throughout the country over the next months, because holding him accountable can happen in a number of ways. Prison obviously is one of them, but there are other approaches that can be taken. I think one of the important comments that came out of this long day down in Georgia was by the former lieutenant governor when he said, this is a pivot point. The Republican Party needs to move away, quit being part of a cult, in effect, is what he meant, where you follow someone who lies to you, undermines legitimate processes of government. Move away from him politically. And, trying to get back to politics in the sense that we used to think we had it, despite all of the human frailties that accompanied it, where, you had parties that would sanction and hold accountable their own members. I was on the impeachment inquiry staff. You cannot make up my life, you know. And so back in 1974, when the impeachment by the House Judiciary Committee was voted on, 4 Republicans voted to impeach President Nixon. Then 3 members of the Senate, leading Republican senators, I think it was Barry Goldwater and Howard Baker and I think Hugh Scott, went to see President Nixon and said, this was a bipartisan vote, you need to resign. Well, that's almost impossible to imagine today because of what's happened to the Republican Party, what they've allowed to happen to themselves. So I hope that we won't have accountability just for Donald Trump, and if there are others named in these indictments along with him for their behavior, but we'll also have accountability for a political party that has just thrown in with all of the lies and the divisiveness and the lack of any conscience about what was being done to the country.
In terms of getting out of this and coming out of this crisis stronger, hopefully, for having confronted, I think, very dark prospects in terms of what this means for democracy, it does feel like the Republican Party as a whole is not ready to make that turn. And I'm thinking really about Ron DeSantis as the guy who's running second to Donald Trump in the Republican primary right now. He is promising that there shouldn't...
Oh, this was recorded last night, but the poll today puts Chris Christie ahead of Ron DeSantis, and it is about damn time. So just want to provide that little addendum update. Since yesterday, Ron DeSantis is no longer second place.
Be an independent Department of Justice.
Yeah, well,
under any
he's
Republican
promising
president.
anything to try to get some attention. It's kind of pathetic, isn't it?
He's also removed 2 elected prosecutors in Florida who were...
Thank you, Hillary Clinton, for trolling Ron DeSantis. You are part of the club. I prefaced this video by saying I had not been her fan previously. Actually, I wrote a Come to Jesus letter to her in 2016. That's how Jake and I started the conversation. But in that letter, I did say that my family had some personal gratitude toward Mrs. Clinton. When she was senator in New York, my aunt was adopting my cousin from overseas, and it got held up in some red tape, and Mrs. Clinton helped my cousin come into our family's life. So I do have gratitude, and my aunt has always been a lifelong fan and admired Hillary Clinton. Working on her campaign and more intimately involved in her process and presentation, I have grown to respect things that she has done in her life, and I have admiration for her, even though she and I may not politically always be on the same page. I do want to say thank you for trolling Ron DeSantis. We are certainly on the same team on this one.
chosen, who were elected, who he stepped in and removed them. Georgia Republicans have given themselves the power to remove elected prosecutors as well, just ahead of Fani Willis making this decision. That law will go into effect about 7 or 8 weeks from now, which will give them that opportunity. It does feel like the idea of law enforcement being used as a tool of partisan politics is something that, with whatever justification, the Republican Party is really embracing and ready to run with or without Trump. That feels like a big step
that's
in the
yet to
wrong
be
direction.
determined, Rachel. That is yet to be determined. I think it is possible that there are many now in the Republican Party who have signed on to that kind of approach to politics, that undermining of democracy, undermining the rule of law. But the shadow of Trump looms so large over all of them. It's really hard to know, once he's off the scene, one way or the other, politically or because of accountability arising out of the various indictments he faces, whether or not backbone will all of a sudden be regrown. Whether
Well, but I have to say I admire her poise. Her saying that, are we going to be a country that has a president in prison? I'm just thinking to myself, she's saying this about the same man who led chants about her to lock her up. And here she is saying, locking him up might not be the right answer. Let's talk about it. Let's have a debate as a country and as a society about where this leads us and how we want to proceed with this. This is leadership. This is leadership of the Democratic Party, overrun by progressives, overrun by people who are bloodthirsty to lock Trump up. This is what leadership looks like. And she's giving a lot of benefit of the doubt to the Republican Party, where I could tell her in the Georgia Republican Party for the over 10 years, there has not been leadership. And so she's saying, well, will this backbone emerge? And I have to say no, because most of this century, at least in the Georgia Republican Party, it has been led by lack of backbone. It has been led by trying to make people afraid and spreading these conspiracy theories, and Trump is just really, really good at it and can create a cult out of it. But it was already there. This was already the tone of the Republican Party. This is why Trump is so successful, because he just picked up on things people were not as good at as he is. But when he disappears, the question of the Republican Party suddenly growing leadership is not one I have yet to see in the last 20 years. So I don't think Trump's removal from the situation is suddenly going to spawn leadership regrowth in the party. But that's my personal perspective. Hillary Clinton is certainly giving them a lot more benefit of the doubt than I personally would.
conscience will once again be part of the, the Republican Party ethos. We don't know. We hope, because it would be for the good of the country that were to happen. But if it doesn't, the only way we can possibly contest it and defeat it is through the rule of law, as we're seeing with these prosecutors at the federal and now the state level, but also through elections, where we have to defeat those who want to weaponize divisiveness, who want to undermine democratic values and institutions. And that should be, frankly, nonpartisan, not just bipartisan. People should all be saying what the so-called never-Trumpers, the former Republicans who are, now out beating the drums to say you cannot support him and you cannot support the people who support his attitude toward our country.
On the issue of sort of healing and getting better as a country on this, in reading your article in The Atlantic, I feel like I get the diagnosis. You talk about Surgeon General Vivek Murthy having essentially diagnosed this problem of loneliness being a health problem in this country. You describe it as a real political problem as well. And I get, in a very fundamental way, this idea that, atomized, disconnected populations are really primed for extremism. That's part of what makes us vulnerable to the call of strongman leadership and authoritarianism, makes us susceptible to it like any other number of mature democracies around the world. What I don't get is the prescription for how to fix that, and whether that is a prescription that should come from people who want to be political leaders, or whether that's something we need to cure as a culture in some other way. I mean, what's the way out of it?
Well,
I got so excited when she asked this question, because I didn't know the answer when she asked it. And then I heard Hillary Clinton's answer and I was like, that's my answer. So I have put on my Facebook page, I've said, as many of you may not know, I really started my political consulting advisory in Scotland around this issue, around creating functional governance with the Scottish government. And I used that, I wound up having success there just by proposing these types of solutions. And when I saw the kind of success that they had, then that's when I reconnected with Hillary Clinton's campaign in 2016. And I said, look, this is working in Scotland. I have proof of concept. We can take this and scale it up to the US model. And so, but when Rachel Maddow asked this question, I was like, I don't know the answer. And then Hillary gave her the answer that I provided. And that's so exciting to me.
Look, I think it's cultural, political, and probably economic as well. I think we have to do a much better job of finding ways for people to work together again, work together on community projects, work together through existing organizations, whether it be, civic or religious. I mean, look at the outpouring of help for the people in Maui right now. I mean, that kind of volunteer effort that is so American, so much at the core of who we are when we are at our best. But I also think that we have to do a better job of trying to stand up against the divisiveness and against the constant stream of lies and falsehoods that come out of not just politicians, but also social media and other sources of information. So there's enough work for all of us to do. It's not just political leaders. It's really everybody saying, this country is too precious, too valuable, too important to allow it to continue to be fragmented the way it has been. And rebuilding that sense of trust and community is no easy task. I don't think anybody would argue with how difficult it would be. But there are ways of doing it. And let me just say, I don't think Joe Biden gets credit enough for trying to model responsible leadership.
I post this constantly on Twitter. As a moderate Georgia voter, I voted for Joe Biden's leadership. I voted for leadership that looks like leadership. So I voted for this package. The first time I ever voted Democrat in my life. Not true. I did vote for her because I did vote against Trump in 2016. But I voted for the leadership package that Joe Biden has presented that I have not seen ever in the Republican Party in this century.
Kind of getting up every day, doing the job. The legislative accomplishments that came out of his first, year and a half were amazing. We're rebuilding our infrastructure. We're once again investing in clean energy, advanced manufacturing, and so much more. We're trying to, from a legislative perspective, under his leadership, to put back into place some of the things that give people a sense, perhaps, of security and confidence. Optimism about the future. And, what more can a leader do? I mean, really, when you come down and think about it, we've got Democratic governors now who are making school lunch free. That's a big deal because, unfortunately, we have a lot of kids who don't get adequate nutrition. And we have Republican governors who are lowering the age of employment so that 13 and 14-year-olds can now be put to work. That is, in a nutshell, kind of where we are. Why wouldn't we want to join hands and support families in a difficult time, and particularly try to give kids more stability to be able to have better choices instead of just ripping away every social support? So this has to happen at all levels of politics, government, but more broadly, society as well.
Wow. What I really liked is when she talked about us needing to rebuild trust. And that was what made me laugh, because that was what I said in my letter to her in 2016 that Jake Sullivan disagreed with. I said that people didn't trust her and that she needed to build trust if she wanted to win the election. And he wrote me a response and told me he disagreed with me. And so that was that was where we agreed to disagree on that. I said, well, this is my perspective as a moderate conservative voter. I'm sure it's the perspective that many voters share. So you can disagree with me, but I also reflect a sentiment that she may have to overcome in many voters. So I just think it's true. that letter to her in 2016 that she was the person that could potentially prevent us going down this path in the first place, required building trust. And I did a lot of analysis for that campaign about the fractures that were existing at the time and have been exacerbated ever since. And I just think it's a wonderful sentiment to end on. Thank you, Mrs. Clinton, for sharing your thoughts and for with such poise in the face of people who did want to lock you up, to say that that may not be the answer, and we should all encourage debate, encourage trust building, and encourage community building. So that's a great note to end on. As a moderate voter, I can agree with those points. We can build common ground and consensus surrounding those things that we could all agree on, and that's the direction I'd like to see us go. So that's been my commentary about the exciting events in Georgia this week. Post your comments below how you think this debate should go. Let's have that conversation here and now. And on my Facebook page, I'll link that below also. Sorry for how laggy these videos were. We're having some thunderstorms, some weather here that may impact my streaming. So I will also post those links to all of the videos I've included in this video below, so you can watch them yourself without lag if your internet is better. Have a great day. Thank you so much for joining me.